So what month is it, Eric?
It's July.
And what happens in July, Eric?
Hashtag Prime Day.
It totally did. Did you take advantage?
I did.
What'd you do?
I bought an Amazon Echo.
Fun. You know what? I have one. I actually have an Echo and here's what I'm going to say to you. I've actually sold my soul to both Amazon and Google.
Really?
I love them, and I understand they're probably evil. They probably are, but I love Amazon. I am an Amazon Prime member.
Me too.
And I have the Echo. I have the Dot. But it's funny that you say this. It has like new skills, Alexa does now. So I think we could call each other.
I think you're allowed to say, Alexa, what can you do now? Or what's new with you or something?
What's a new skill?
Okay. And yeah, I was just reading all about this because I haven't really had a chance to use it. I just love the fact that I can say, Alexa, play Ella Fitzgerald, and then Ella is just all over my house.
I love it so much.
That's beautiful.
I do.
And I can say, Alexa, reorder dog food. Mm-hmm. And it's connected to my Prime account, and it shows up on my front door 2 days later with free shipping. Popperation is sponsored by Amazon. It's totally not.
We would totally
but you know what?
If they want to give us money.
Amazon, call us.
Call us, Amazon.
Because we love you.
That's a great idea. We do.
Yeah.
When the chaos of popular culture makes your brain hurt, you really need belief in the form of a transfusion of analysis and humor. It's time for a Popperation. Join hosts Eric and Stacey as they dissect popular culture one bloody organ at a time. It's just what the doctor ordered.
And it's Popperation. I'm Stacey.
I am Eric.
And we are talking today about the 25th anniversary of a crazy cool movie that I don't know if it was expected to be a hit, but it certainly was, A League of Their Own. And it's summer, so we do think about baseball, and thus we thought it would be appropriate.
I love this movie. It's just, and you know what, Stacey? I rewatched it because I knew we were going to be talking about it today. Mm-hmm. So I was on the road for work. I was in my hotel room. I downloaded it, sat there on my iPad, and I just watched League of Their Own. It's even better than I remembered it being. I mean, I knew I liked it, but it's such a great movie.
It ages well, and one reason I think it ages well is because it was a period piece.
Yes.
And I think that that's easier, even when you take into consideration that it was made in the 92, early 90s. Kind of the same difference. Yeah. That even though it was in that time period, because they were making a period piece, they still had to throw it back to the 40s. So it ages a little better than, a movie.
Although, it's funny, a couple episodes ago, we talked about Bonnie and Clyde, that didn't necessarily age as well because even though that was a Depression era period piece, they looked so 60s.
Yeah, because in the 60s and 70s, I've noticed, because you look at, say, Hello, Dolly, or Funny Lady, Funny Girl, and I don't know whether it was Barbra Streisand, I doubt it, but it's the makeup and the hair was very of that time. It was very 60s and 70s. They might put them in, and that was the same with Faye Dunaway's hair in Bonnie and Clyde. In League of Their Own, they went old school, and they tried to make everything as accurate. They went, they did it like the Brits do.
Yeah.
They tried to get the details right of that time period, as opposed to making it, it's historical, but it's going to be cool too.
Yeah.
No. She didn't do that. And so I'm going to just give you a little bit of a history thing.
Okay.
So that we know where we are when this movie came out.
Did you go on the internet or something and look up?
I went on the intranet, the interweb, and I binged it. What's funny, Bing, I hate. I Google things, but I make fun of Bing because when you Bing things, you don't always get good information.
They're never going to sponsor us now, Stacey.
Bing? But Google might, and I love Google. Okay. And here, so I found out, I did a little bit of research. I did an Eric. I pulled an Eric today.
Wow.
I know. So this first one, this is why I included this one. I'm just going to say this little factoid.
Okay.
And then I'm going to let you figure out why I included this factoid.
Okay.
Millionaire eccentric Ross Perot announced his run for president.
Because we never thought that a millionaire
because we
eccentric with no
laughed
experience
his
in politics could
ass
ever be
off.
president? Is that why?
Everyone laughed, and it was a ridiculous notion. Okay, that's why.
I just remember he had pie charts. Remember?
I'm moving on.
Okay.
This is what I'm doing. John Gotti, who was a mafia boss, was finally sentenced to prison. And he had been known as a Teflon Don he got away with absolutely everything. Hurricane Andrew.
Who does that remind me of? Go ahead.
Again. Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida, and that was the pre-Katrina big hurricane that hit.
That's when we thought that was
we thought that was the worst.
Yep.
The Summer Olympics happened in Barcelona.
Yeah.
The LA riots when Rodney King's the police accused of beating Rodney King were acquitted. That happened.
Oh,
that
and it
year.
caused the big riot. Yep.
Charles and Diana separated.
Oh.
Never been done before. That
was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a really big deal. The Winter Olympics also happened. Remember when they would have the summer and the winter in the same year?
They were each every 4 years.
And they're still each is every 4 years, but they flip-flopped them.
Two.
Correct. Yep. South Africa voted to end apartheid.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
And fun fact, Jerry Springer was still a highly rated TV show. So that's what happened. Now, here was some of the competition. This is also out. When A League of Their Own came out, Disney's Aladdin came out.
Really? That's 25 years old?
Home Alone 2.
Oh, God.
A Few Good Men. You Can't Handle the Truth. That's my Jack Nicholson. Aren't I brilliant? Wayne's World. Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, which was a really good movie.
Yes, Morgan Freeman.
And Basic Instinct.
Not a very good movie.
No.
Really?
And The Bodyguard with what's her face and what's his face?
Yeah, Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston. So we'll be talking a little bit about singers who act in this conversation.
Yeah, we will get that because of, this had a lot of... It had a lot of people who were already celebrities, who were already stars, but then it also had some that were up-and-comers who would later on make names for themselves.
Sure.
And we'll talk a little bit about that. But I loved this movie. I was a nanny at the time, and I remember
that.
taking the little girl that I was nannying. I think it may have been a birthday party or whatever, and we went to the theater and we saw it, and I loved it. It was a great inspirational kind of motivational movie for girls, I thought, to say, look what these women did.
Yeah.
And they were girls, and they had stuff they had to deal with, but they did it anyway. And it was so long ago. It was 50 years ago at the time. It was 50 years ago that they had done it. So, at that point, you're like, just think of what we can do in the next 50 years. Okay.
And we still don't have, we don't have a professional baseball league for women today, so that's interesting.
It's still working. But anyway, A League of Their Own, Penny Marshall was the director.
Yep. And
everybody knows her from Laverne and Shirley, and then she went into directing.
Yes.
And this, to me, showed she really knew what she was doing. I felt like this was, she really hit it. She hit it out of the park.
Oh, I see what you did
there.
What
I did there.
Stacey.
She hit a home run. But the thing about this, that I think it was a big hit, and granted, Tom Hanks was in there, and so you had that big name attached to it, and Gina Davis was still a big name at the time, so you had these two big names
and
there.
She's wonderful in this movie.
They're both wonderful in this movie.
She just stepped right out of the 40s. And looked great, and
I felt like the details were really hit.
Yes.
So anyway, but that's what I remember of it, and that's what makes me feel good about this movie. It is truly a feel good movie that I think everybody should see it, because
and it's inspirational, absolutely. What I also thought was interesting, though, watching it again, is that I kind of recall it's like, oh, look, here are women and they're athletes, and it doesn't matter that they're women. And yet when I watched it a second time, I'm like, wow, they also had to deal with all this double standard crap, right? So the first time you really kind of noticed that was when John Lovitz was in the barn with Gina Davis and Lori Petty saying, we want to hire you, you're good players, and also you're pretty. That just kind of came right out.
It was clearly, Exactly. It was clearly the 40s, and they were dealing with a lot of things that you wouldn't put up with now, that you could actually get a lawsuit about you now. And I think that was also fascinating. Again, in 1992, there weren't a lot of movies that talked about this. Sexual harassment was starting to be something that people were taking seriously.
Yep.
But again, I use the term starting. There was still a lot that, I mean, the difference between now and 1992 in how people were thought of sexual harassment or misogyny or feminism even is very, very different. And so some of these things, when we're watching it in 1992, and our minds were blown, which now we look at it and we think, well, that was quaint. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not dated in watching it, but you have to understand the reaction it got. If it came out now, it wouldn't get the same kind of reaction because we're used to some of these things.
Yeah, we just kind of roll our eyes now. But it ages well because it's not about a 1992 feeling about sexual harassment. It's about, here's what the attitude was in World War II.
Here's how they overcame it.
Yeah.
And so I think
here's some
that's
of the
what it's
things that are ridiculous. But then right after that happens, right, they go to, they have to make a stop on their way to Chicago to see this amazing player, Marla Hooch.
Yeah.
Were people actually named Hooch? Are people still named Hooch?
I don't know if they're still named Hooch. There are some funky names out there. And this is coming from Stacey Fearhighlight. So it's not, I have to back away from some of these comments, or rather some of these subjects about funky last names because of my own, Mr. Peterson. So I'll let you go with this one.
I just don't know. You hear a name like Marla Hooch, and you know you're in the 40s, and it's like, well, someone still has to be named Hooch.
Well, that was her maiden name.
If they were just true. Anyway, Marla Hooch is this amazing ball player. And of course, the whole time you see her playing ball in her tryout, you never see her face because when you get close to her, she's not, what one would call a pretty girl. And John Lovitz is about to say, no, see you later. And it's not until Gina Davis and Lori Petty fold their arms and like, we're not going either unless you take this woman with you because she's an amazing ball player. And of course, she ends up joining the Rockford Peaches later on. The other moment that was kind of early on that again kind of recalled this is when the girls see their uniform for the first time. And it's a miniskirt, and they're all like, we can't play baseball in that. And, David Strathairn is just like, this is what you're going to wear or you're going to go home. And so many things about this whole league were set up to be a little bit of a TNA show in addition to they weren't taken very seriously as athletes, even by the marketers.
No.
It wasn't about come see women play. It was come see pretty girls, and you can't watch real baseball, because all the men are at war. So you come watch girls be pretty girls, and they really had to prove themselves as athletes, even to their own fans.
I think it was, in the end, everybody was surprised. Oh, this is actually a pretty good game. They're actually really good players.
Yeah.
I think that was the attitude, that, they picked them. But we'll tell you all the plot in a minute. We're going to take a little break, and then we're going to come back and talk about what the actual plot of this movie was.
Yes.
And stuff like that.
You're listening to Poperation with Eric and Stacey. Take a deep breath. This may sting a little.
Okay, and we're back. This is Poperation. I'm Stacey.
I'm Eric.
And we're talking about the 25th anniversary of A League of Their Own, the movie directed by Penny Marshall and starring Gina Davis and Tom Hanks. And I want to go a little bit over what the plot was. And it takes place during World War II. And as you know, most of the men were at war. Overseas, fighting the Nazis. And so baseball, they didn't have enough guys for all the teams. So they had to figure out how to continue to make money because, of course, as we know, professional sports are all about business.
Sure.
And they were even back then. In the movie, candy mogul Walter Harvey, who was played by Gary Marshall, who is Penny Marshall's brother, and of course he directed Pretty Woman, Princess Diaries,
But you
whole
could
bunch of
always
stuff.
count on him in these little cameos to be. He would never
Right.
carry a movie because he's a little bit,
No, he wasn't that good.
But he was always great in these little tiny,
Well, and Penny
roles.
would cast him in roles that were perfect for him.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
gruff curmudgeon kind of guy.
Yeah, but I also remember him from Soap Dish as the head of the studio.
Right, exactly.
And he always played the head of something. He was always a very powerful person and
Yes.
slightly ridiculous.
Yes.
But anyway, he's great in this movie.
And so anyway, in real life, it was actually Philip Wrigley of Wrigley's Gum.
Really?
Yes. But in the movie, he is a chocolate candy guy.
Okay.
Walter
and did
Harvey.
he want to dump the league like a hot rock the way that Gary Marshall did halfway through this movie when it wasn't doing so well financially? Is that...
He did.
He did?
Yes. He
Wow.
did. So what then happens is he says, what if we have a girls' baseball? And I think that tells you something right there.
Mm-hmm.
Not a women's.
No, girls.
It's girls. And it was called the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, the AAGPBL.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yes, but that's exactly what it was, and that's what they kept it. But it's girls. I think that tells you everything you need to know about that. So they had scouts go across the country to farms to where, little teams, county teams are playing each other. And they were looking for women to come to the big tryouts.
Yep.
For, I don't know, they had 12 teams or something like that.
And even in the movie, the tryouts are in Chicago. And of course, what's the baseball field in Chicago? Wrigley Field. That's, So they little nod, even though they never mention his name.
So anyway, the whole deal was, so here were women who would never, ever get the opportunity to play professional sports, ever. Because you got married, and you had kids, and you did whatever your moms did, and all of that. So this was an opportunity for a lot of women to do something that they love and or excelled at and get paid for it.
Yeah.
So it was a huge deal. And so that's
Did
the
they
stakes
even
are high.
have female professional athletes, period, in the 40s?
Probably in track and field. And gymnastics. Yeah, they did. They had, they had.
I mean, the Olympics were always unpaid, but that's always
that's true,
unpaid.
too.
So I don't know if once women competed in the
you're
Olympics,
right. I'm not
I don't
sure.
know.
The Olympic. I was thinking of the Olympics.
I
They
was
had
thinking
athletes.
tennis is where women athletes usually used to, and I don't know when women started playing professional tennis.
I couldn't tell you. That's a good one.
Interesting.
But yeah, this is a story about that first season of getting this AAGPBL. And we'll see how many times I'm able to say that this time. To getting it off the ground.
Yep.
Getting it working, because the idea was we need butts and seats at the stadiums. And so when the war was over, because the stakes were really high, so the women have this opportunity, but then there's always in the background, but when the war is over, what then? And as far as the guys, the owners and all that, they were thinking, well, we'll have the boys back. We don't need the girls anymore. But that's in the head of these women, is that, what am I going to do? I'm enjoying this, but what am I going to do after that? So there was, it's always this cloud hanging over.
And that's really a big story around World War II in general. I mean, the whole Rosie the Riveter story is women who left. I mean, it wasn't just, people who got to play professional baseball. A lot of women started working outside the home for the very first time in World War II.
Correct.
And then were kind of pushed by society to go back to the kitchen.
Factories was
after
huge.
all the boys came home.
Huge thing in the factories, because all those men left. These women came in to learn these huge machinery stuff. They were making their own money. It was very independent.
Yeah. Although
feeling.
watching women play baseball is a lot more exciting for a movie-going audience than watching them.
Well, and that was the whole point.
Airplanes.
So, as you said earlier, they wanted pretty girls. They did want people who could play, because they didn't want it to be completely a modeling show.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted it to be a good game.
But they wanted pretty girls.
Starring pretty girls.
And they were wearing outfits that were short. They so you go and you do this tryout. And then once you tried out, you were put on a team, and you had to go through charm school.
Yes, and they really had to do that.
They really had to go through charm school, and they had to learn how to dance. You say, what does that have to do with anything? Nope. They had to learn how to eat. They had to know the right fork to do. They had to do all of this stuff.
And partly, it's like it's not that different from people who are becoming celebrities today in terms of, I think what that was is in the 40s, these girls very well could have become famous at some point. And, and so if you're famous all of a sudden and you're hobnobbing with the hoi polloi, you want to, you need to know which fork to use.
But it was also Wrigley, the real mogul who put this in action. His idea, he wanted to have ladylike players.
Yes.
That was important, that he didn't want man-like women out there. He wanted it to be clear that they were still ladies.
So even though you're playing baseball and even though you're sliding into your bases and getting dirt all over your uniforms.
And blood, by the way, if you're sliding in short shorts.
And the bruises that you saw that some of them, I mean, they really did a good job of kind of saying, this is what, these girls, they were athletes. They really put themselves out there.
Totally did.
But were expected to also stir their tea with a very, swift and ladylike
Now, in
motion.
1944, you asked, but in 1944, he actually did sell it. He was over it. He realized that the war was coming to an end.
Yep.
And so he was good. He was done with the girls. The AAGPBL, it changed its name. That was such a mouthful several times, but it ended up going back to the AAGPBL. I think at that point it was on principle.
Yeah.
And it lasted until 1954.
Okay.
600 women played professionally in that baseball league during that time period.
And what's interesting is when I first started this movie, and it was like this little voice in the back of my head just kind of went, baseball, not softball. Because even today, most women play softball.
They play softball.
And men play baseball.
They're professional softball leagues.
But it's interesting, I mean, and I consider myself to be a pretty enlightened feminist, and that was a thought that even occurred in the back of my head.
This is baseball.
Is that these are women playing baseball.
Now, I'm going to tell you one of the scenes that still stuck with me at the time, and it still stays with me, and I will think of it every once in a while. It's early on. It's during the tryouts. And there's all these women on this field in Chicago and throwing and whatever. And I think it's Lori Petty, who plays Gina Davis's sister.
Yeah.
And basically, just to throw in the plot thing, it's basically we're going through this whole adventure with Gina Davis and her sister Lori. Petty plays her sister. It's Dorothy and Kit. Dorothy is a catcher. Kit is a pitcher. And we're watching, the adventure through their eyes, and they're two they're from the farms in, I don't know, Kansas or somewhere, and they're two farm girls.
I wanted to say Wisconsin.
It may have been. Yeah. It doesn't really matter to me. They're all square states. And if you're living in one of those square states, I apologize because they're really rectangle. But I'm just really bad at geography. Anyway, so they're at the tryouts, and Kit has just thrown. She's a really good pitcher. She throws the ball, but it goes wild and hits something and gets knocked out over the fence behind Gina Davis. And over the fence is a group of black women. And Gina says, "Can you just pitch it over?" The woman throws it, and it is so hard, it burns Gina's hand when she catches it.
Yeah.
And I remember, so Gina looks back over at them. And it was Penny's nod to, this is a story of white baseball players.
Yeah.
There were still a lot of talent that never, ever got a chance in 1942.
Okay.
But I remember seeing that when that woman throws it back.
Yeah.
And Gina looks at her hand and is just wringing it because it hurts so bad. And, of course, what you see on Gina's face is, why the hell aren't they inside the fence?
Yeah. And that was her feeling about Marla, too, right? When they saw her, for her, it's about talent. It's like, why aren't the talented people here?
Exactly.
Now, it's funny. I just saw this movie 3 days ago, so a little correction on that. She actually throws it over Gina's head to another player.
Oh, is that what it was?
Far, far away.
Okay.
Gina was right there.
Somebody's hand hurts.
Yeah, she's like, toss me the ball. And the woman throws it over her head way farther than Gina expected her to throw it. That girl goes, oh my gosh, ow. And then Gina looks back and says, why aren't you, with this look on her face that says, you should be playing this game. And the woman kind of looks at her like, thank you for that look of recognition, but I'm going to go back to where
I'm not invited. But, and again, it wasn't this big hammer in your face.
That we should probably do more often in movies today. And sometimes we forget, but but you're right. That was a great kind of, 1992 it wasn't a simpler time, but we thought it was a simpler time in terms of race relations. And it was a great tiny little ad just to put in the movie, just to say
it's
to
not a
any
hammer.
Black woman who's in the audience, who feels like, well, where am I in this movie? And it's like, well, it was the 40s. You were on the other side of the fence, but you were just as talented as these girls were.
Well, I think it was also, if not saying that, I don't, it was definitely just we recognize that this is a story of these white women.
Yep.
But understand that there were other races who could play this game as well.
Who could have, who weren't invited. Not the 40s. Yeah.
Who weren't invited. But I says it wasn't a hammer in the face of they were racist from Penny Marshall. It was this subtle nod to think of what it could have been.
Exactly.
And I appreciate that. I think that was directing. I think that was it, and it was a lovely touch. But again, it's one of those lovely touches that I remember, and it stays with me, and it resonated.
Yeah. So you mentioned Dottie and Kit, and I think in terms of the plot of this movie, yes, it was the first year of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, but also kind of the glue. I think the emotional glue that kind of held the movie together was really the story of this sibling rivalry, kind of a one-sided sibling rivalry between these two women.
Well, it was the classic story of the younger sister trying to live up to, be equal to, or even surpass the older sister in some way. The younger sister trying to find her own way, having been in the shadow of her older sister for all of her life.
And really her older sister doing as much as she really could to kind of say, I want to get out of your way. I want you to shine. But probably she was a more talented baseball player. She was also, married.
Well, she was older. She was older, and apparently there were some scenes that were cut. And one of the scenes was that apparently Gina's character, you said she was married. She was married, but apparently she had been engaged to her husband for like 8 years, but he didn't ask her to marry him until he was called to go abroad to get into the military. And there's a scene where the younger sister, mentions that. And that, to me, it's interesting about that because that colors then the relationship of the older sister, what was going on with the older sister, because that wasn't in the movie.
Wasn't really explored in
and
the final
so cut. The feeling was, she has this great relationship with her husband. She loves him, yada, yada. And yet, that was a scene that was in there that would have colored my impression of her, because I'll be honest, Dorothy's character does tend to be this icon throughout the movie. And that's a little hard to swallow. So I do, on a second viewing of it, I get where Kit is coming from to an extent.
Sure.
Kit's biggest problem, I don't know if she was less talented. I think she was just immature.
Possible. And
extremely insecure.
Yeah, and didn't have quite, because the reason that Kit sometimes doesn't play as well as she should have is that she won't take any advice from Gina Davis, who's like, stop going for those high balls.
Correct.
And she won't quit when she's too tired to keep going. And so Gina's got a little bit more maturity in that she accepts where she is and she paces herself. Correct. And she, probably that's what improves her game, not so much talent.
She's not as insecure. There's a lot of insecurity that the Kit character.
But at some point in the movie, and it's 25 years old, so I'm not going to worry too much about spoilers, Gina Davis tries to get herself assigned to a different team. And what happens is that Kit ends up being assigned to a different team. And even her teammates are like, Kit, you're still in the league. Like, you still get to play. It's all good. But she feels like her sister has just removed her from her friends and her community. Right. Now she's got to get to know a whole other group of girls, and
well,
she's
she
really
feels like
upset
it was a
about
demotion, is what
Yeah.
she felt like.
Yeah.
And it was like, yet again, her sister changed her own destiny. She was not in control of her own destiny.
Yeah.
Kid had a lot of insecurity issues, and she was sometimes hard to take.
Mm-hmm.
And so during the plot, stuff that happens, especially the first time I watched it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Second time, I'm sitting there and I kind of understood where Kit was.
Yeah, I mean, I felt for Kit. I understood where she was, and you're right, she was very immature, and so it was easier to like Gina Davis as a
Yes.
character. Something that did happen, Gina Davis and Tom Hanks have this great scene on the bus where she basically, he reaches for a quote-unquote drink, and she hands him a bottle of Coke, and I thought, okay, that's really not how you get over addiction. Thanks. Little, sweet film that's depicting a simpler time. That's really not how an alcoholic stops drinking.
It was 19.
But okay, even in 1942, that's not how you beat an addiction like that. But but it was cute. It was a very sweet scene.
But that wasn't her job. Her job wasn't to help him beat his addiction.
No.
Her job was playing baseball.
But he was sober for the rest of the movie, and I was just like, okay, that was a sweet moment. My point was, it looked as though a little romance might be brewing between Gina Davis and Tom Hanks.
Talk about another scene that didn't make it into the movie.
Really?
They had a kiss.
So then I'm glad that was cut. Actually, I'm going to say I'm really glad that was cut, because I appreciate the fact that you can depict adult men and women being each other's friends and have it be that, and when her husband shows up with an injury in the middle of the war, halfway through the movie, it is a bit of an, oh, look, but she wasn't unfaithful to him.
Nope.
Even in mine, she didn't, the final cut that I saw, she didn't kiss Tom Hanks.
No.
She was, but they were friends and they were colleagues, and there was a lot of respect between each other as, from player to manager. There was they respected each other a lot, and it was just that. And I thought that was actually really refreshing.
Yeah. And I think it's possible that she saw the scene and went, we don't need that. We don't need that extra moment between them.
No.
And it made it a different relationship.
And it demeans her somehow. Like, she's now,
well, the scene happened apparently before she left. That was why she ended up leaving, because of that.
Okay.
And so that it changed things. But I think it was, I agree with you. I think that was a really good decision on Penny's part to leave it like that, because it was nice that men and women can be friends. And so I like that. I like that relationship as well, because they were fun. It was a very kind of, at that point, it became a buddy movie, and it was really, really fun.
Yeah, and it's just, and obviously we've been friends for 25 years now. We're not going to kiss because there's this whole, there's the homosexual.
We've done that, though.
Elephant in the room.
We've done that.
We have on stage. We have. But but straight men and straight women can be friends with each other. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. Hollywood, guess what? Like, adult men and adult women who are both heterosexual can actually be friends and not have it clouded by that. And we never see that in the movies, hardly ever.
That's true.
And so it's nice to see, that relationship.
So there are other, and there, as I said, this is, I think it's considered a classic. And when we come back, we're going to talk about why it is, or it should be, considered a classic here on Poperation.
Open wide. It's your prescribed dose of Poperation with Eric and Stacey.
And we are back at Poperation. I am still Stacey.
I'm still Eric.
And we're still talking about A League of Their Own. So you said 25 years later. So you said you thought it should be a classic. Do you think it's considered a classic? I think it is considered a classic. I hope
so. Yeah. I mean, I hope it certainly should be. I mean, it ages so well. It's still absolutely entertaining.
I didn't know that there was a girls' baseball team until it came around. It's not a documentary.
No.
But the fact is, it did bring attention to the idea that even then, even in the 40s, there was something glimmering out there for women being able to do more things and have more opportunities.
No, it's funny. There a couple weeks back, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I put something on the Poperation Facebook page that said, name a line from a movie that gives away the movie without naming the film. And one of the things there was there's no crying in baseball. Everybody knows what movie that is from, and that to me that's part of what determines a classic, because when it's something like that becomes part of the vernacular. That was a scene which it's interesting. I read an interview with Gina Davis where she said none of us had any idea that was going to be like the most quotable line from anything ever. We knew that Tom Hanks was really doing great work and that it was very funny, but no one expected
it
that
is one
moment.
of the funniest scenes.
Yes.
And I will say this. Yes, Tom Hanks was funny as hell, but you have to give credit to the actress who was crying.
Yes.
Because she was trying not, the idea is the character is trying not to cry because he's yelling at her, but he's yelling at her and it's making her cry. So she has this cycle going on.
Yes.
He, in the meantime, is trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
Exactly.
Because he doesn't know how to deal with women versus men.
And what I got this time is that when he says there's no crying in baseball, he's mad at her for crying, but he also knows that he messed up.
Yes.
He's yelling at her so she'll be a better player, and he's watching her disintegrate, and he's thinking to himself, she's not being a better player now. She's not going to be a better player as a result of this conversation.
But he also is in a point where he's in a loop where I don't know how to get out of this.
Exactly. And then there's this hilarious scene that's about an hour later where he has to give the same player feedback, and he tries so hard to do it in a very kind of constructive way, and it's killing him.
It takes forever, and it's hysterical, but it's only hysterical because you're comparing it to when he did this scene where he says there's no crying in baseball. And
she smiles and walks away, and it's like, oh, it worked, but it just about almost killed him.
It really did.
Do that.
And so it's one of those that, and I'll be honest, we talk about this being empowering for women and all, a lot of the good lines, the funny lines go to men. I'm going to say Tom Hanks gets most of them, but John Lovitz plays a very small part. He's only in the very beginning of this movie. He plays a scout, talent scout, and he's the one who finds Dorothy and Kit.
Yep.
And Hooch.
Marla Hooch.
Oh my gosh, he's hysterical.
So funny.
Almost everything that came out of his mouth was funny.
Yes.
And so it's almost like a lot of the women were the straight men, and then you had these two guys, and Tom Hanks, of course. Tom Hanks had a lot of funny lines. Yeah. So, so there's a little part of me that kind of goes, why did he have a lot of lines? Although I will say, Rosie O'Donnell had a lot of good lines as well.
As did Madonna.
Madonna had some good lines, but a lot of Rosie's lines were Madonna was the butt of the joke. And so, but let's talk about who was in it.
So, interestingly, there's a great scene right after the lists are posted, and there's a woman who won't leave the field. And
this is who when they put the lists of the teams
of who made it and who got cut.
So you've tried out. Now you're all in a big group. They've put the lists.
So there's two lists. There's four teams, and then there's a whole list on the bottom that says if you were cut. And she's looking at the board, and she won't leave the field. And you think she's been cut and she's in denial, right? And she's just looking and she's crying and she's looking and she's crying, and the guy's like, look, if you're cut, you have to leave.
You have to get off the field.
And one other woman figures out what's going on and runs up to her and says, honey, can you read? And she looks at her like, no, she can't. So she says her name. Her name is Shirley Baker. And they find her, and she actually made the team. And she comes back and sits down. That woman who couldn't read is Ann Cusack. She is the sister of John and Joan Cusack. She's a Cusack sibling.
She's one of the Cusacks.
And I didn't know that until I looked at IMDb after I watched the movie, and she had never. So she was great.
Now here's the thing. So you mentioned that scene, which is another scene like when the African American girls are outside. It's a moment where it's not a hammer. Their illiteracy was a big deal in 1942.
Yes.
Didn't have to lecture us. All you had to have is this one moment where this young woman is looking at all this. This it looks like scribble to her, and you're like, why is it? And
of course, it's all in cursive, and in 2017, I'm looking at it like, and we're getting rid of cursive, right?
I know,
that's something that we probably would have had a comment about if the movie had been made today, but we never thought it would go away.
But I mean, it's a moment of just bringing to the attention that we have come a long way in that wouldn't happen now. I mean, yes, you're going to find somebody who can't read. I'm not saying that there is no illiteracy, but it's not like it was.
Yeah.
It was maybe 50-50, especially for women.
Yep.
And so I like the subtlety in bringing these moments to the forefront just for, 90 seconds.
Yeah, although there was another scene that was one of my, and this is one of the things where I watched this movie and I was like, I remember not thinking very much of Madonna's performance when I saw this the first time. And when I saw it again, my thought was, why did I feel that way? Because I think Madonna does really good work in this movie. And there's a scene that happens a little bit later on. She's in the back of the bus with Shirley, teaching her how to read.
Oh, yes. She's
using a dime store bodice ripper.
Yes.
And
it's hysterical.
As she's like making out the term milky white breasts, she's getting, and everyone's turning around going, May, what are you doing? And she's like, no, she's getting really good. And it's such a great character moment for both of them.
Yes.
Because for Madonna's character, May, all the way May, which they never really explain, but it's just there, it's all implied. The way May. It's very much implied, but it's still a PG movie. You can still bring a little girl that you're nannying and don't have to explain anything to her on the way home. But to her, this is just a book. It's as good as anything else. And it's just the stuff that she reads that she doesn't really think that there's anything extraordinary about it. It was something sitting there that she could use to teach Shirley how to read. And yet she's also kind of a girl with a reputation. All the way May, that's what they call her. And yet she's the one who's taking time out of her evening on the bus when she could be sleeping, teaching an illiterate girl how to read.
It softened her and gave you another level to that particular character.
And it was hysterically funny at the same time as she's slowly making out the words to this bodice ripper. It was hilarious.
It was very funny and very clever. And again, the writing and the directing. I just have to give a lot of kudos to Penny Marshall for the directing. I just thought it was very lovely. And you're talking about Madonna's, performance. I think that a lot of people walked away going, "Oh, she sucked," because they were, they had an opinion about Madonna in life. And so then you go see a movie. If you already don't like her, then that colors how you see her. And I didn't have that. I never thought she was awful in it. I'm not saying she's a brilliant actress, and there were movies that she sucked like a Mamma Jam. But I thought she was fine in this. I thought everybody was good in this, and it was here's what I will say about that is I think that my problem with her probably in this movie way back when was the billing, because on the poster it says Tom Hanks, who gets first billing, by the way, which is that's
problematic.
What I'm saying. I had a little bit of an issue with it.
Gina Davis, Madonna, A League of Their Own, and it probably should have said Gina Davis, Tom Hanks, Lori Petty, A League of Their Own. Well, Lori Petty really had
she wasn't that big
role. She wasn't that big of a name. She wasn't that big of a name, but she had the role that was integral to the film. Madonna did not. Madonna was very much kind of on the sidelines.
But that's not how billing works, and that.
Well, sure, I know that. I know that. But I think that's why I had such an issue, is that she wasn't a star of this movie.
No, she shouldn't have been over the billing.
She probably shouldn't have been over the title.
She should have.
But she was trying to make a name for herself as someone who acted as well as was a pop star. And so they put her name over the title to try to get Madonna fans to come see this movie. I agree. I think that's
exactly what it was, PR.
And, she was just really part of this much larger ensemble in the rest of it. But given that, the little moments that she had, she was utterly charming.
As I said, you had Gina Davis, you had Rosie O'Donnell, who I thought was hysterical, and
great.
She and Madonna, which I think this is where they became good friends.
Yes, this is where they met and became friends.
But they had a nice little chemistry, a buddy thing going on there, and it was very funny. As I said, John Lovitz was great. You were talking about Ann Cusack, who is one of the Cusacks, John and Joan, but also, do you remember seeing Tia Leone?
I saw her 3 days ago when I watched this movie, and I thought, who is that? I know that face. I had to look it up because I saw the face, but I couldn't place her.
Yeah, because her hair's not as blonde in that.
Yeah, and I was thinking, is that Gillian Anderson? That was my first thought from the X-Files.
They do look similar at that time.
And then I had to go back and look, and no, it was Tia Leone.
Also in this movie was Rob Reiner's daughter
as Betty Spaghetti. Yep.
And of course, Rob Reiner was Penny Marshall's ex-husband, but I think it was a civil
Yeah.
kind of thing. So
Tracy Reiner wasn't Penny Marshall's daughter.
No, she's not.
Okay.
She's just Rob Reiner's daughter, but that would have been Penny's ex-stepdaughter. I don't even know how that works. But yeah, she was Betty Spaghetti. Exactly.
Who had a great scene.
She did.
You know, she was there, and it was kind of like they kept dropping this nickname. We call her Betty Spaghetti, and she wasn't much of a character. And I was like, what is this? And then it was all setting up for a really wonderful scene about halfway through.
And again, very good writing in that here is this little moment. So you're sitting there and you're touring, you're doing these baseball games, and all of this other little stuff happens, and you forget there's a war going on until... And I remember reading things about women during World War II that when your husband was in the military, you dreaded that knock on the door.
And it was a telegram.
And there was someone there with a telegram. You didn't want that.
Yeah.
And so what happens in this scene is they're after a game, and they're all
before.
Or was it before a game? Oh, sorry. They're all. You just watched it.
Yeah.
Before a game, and they're all hyped up and whatever. And here comes a telegram.
Yes, and the most insensitive delivery man in the entire world, because he announces, one of your husbands has died, but now I don't have the name, so I guess I'm going to have to go back.
Right, and Tom takes control and says, no, you're not going back. Because, of course, you look around and every woman... Every married woman is their eyes are huge, and they're like, oh, shite. And they sit down, and they're like, to wait another 30 minutes while the telegram guy goes back and then comes back. So Tom takes it, rips it open, and Reiner gets this wonderful scene moment where she gets to loses her stuff and all that. As one would. But again, I didn't feel like everything was hammered over the head. No. It was just these subtle little moments that just then startled you into, and at that point the scene is somber because everybody's like, we still have a game to play. Yeah. But again, you're brought back into, there's a war going on. People are dying. Yeah. Yeah. And
really what that scene did as well, it also humanized Gina Davis's character quite a bit, because she was sitting right next to Betty Spaghetti, and of course you're looking at both of their faces. Yes. And
at one point you don't know which one he's going toward.
No, you have no idea, which one he's going toward. And Gina's face is just all about my husband could be dead. And then he's not, but then, and just all the women, the look on their faces when it's discovered who it is, just, the empathy and the fact that they're a team now and they're all really there for each other.
Right.
It's really a lovely moment.
As I said, it's just I felt like it was a lot of lovely moments. Now, here's a question. So we're talking about some of the cast in there. Lori Petty, we talked about her. Yep. She was up and coming at the time. Yep. What was that when she did where it was a tank? Was it called Tank
Girl?
Tank Girl.
Tank Girl. That was actually a big bomb.
But it was a cult favorite or something. It was a cult favorite.
The people who based on a comic book. So, but before comic book movies were a real thing.
Big time before that.
Based on a comic book, and it was not. I've never seen it, so I can't really comment on the film.
I thought it was awful.
Okay, but there is a cult following behind it, but it kind of tanked her career. Yeah. She wasn't heard much after that.
Or was it pun intended?
See what I did there?
You did.
Did you see what I did there?
Clever bastard.
And I hadn't seen her for years until here she comes again in Orange is the New Black.
I didn't know she was in that.
Yes. No, she plays a woman with severe issues.
Okay.
Lolly is the name of the character. And she's got, she looks an awful lot like Tank Girl. She's got black horn-rimmed glasses and very short bleached platinum blonde hair. And she's not well. Lolly is not well, but it's a really good performance. So yeah, she's still working.
Well, that was my question: is whatever happened to Lori Petty?
She's on Orange is the New Black. Well, she's not anymore. She got sent away. She did something bad. No spoilers, but no, she's on there and does a really, really good job.
Well, and that was the end of that question, because I didn't know she had done anything since then, and that because her career was really up, and then suddenly nothing at all. Gina's has kind of fallen off to it, but I think some of it was her choice.
Some of it
she made some choices that didn't
and
quite
she's
hit.
Also doing amazing work at this Gina Davis Institute for Gender in Film and Television.
Okay.
Yeah, and so our episode where we talked about the underrepresentation, a lot of that research actually came from her. Okay. And this institute she's founded. So she's got a purpose. Yeah. She's got a calling.
Well, and I guess so. We've talked a lot about how entertainment doesn't necessarily, I don't feel like it needs to educate necessarily, but if it does accidentally and it's still entertaining, I'm good with that. And I feel like this was not an activist kind of movie. I don't think that's what Penny's point was, but she was, as I said, through some of these subtle writing and directing, able to, like the uniforms, when the girls are like, we can't, those aren't uniforms, they're mini skirts, we can't wear that and play baseball.
And it was done with humor, because as soon as Lori Petty turns to Gina Davis is like, what are you complaining about? I have to squat in that thing.
Yeah.
And it was a funny moment, but it was also like a wow.
But then if you recall later on, when they're doing sliding, and I don't know whether it was Tia Leone's, but somebody's character slides in to base, and she gets up, and the right side of her leg, or whichever side, left side, I guess, wherever she slid, was black and blue and blood, and you're like, the realism of this, the realistic idea that they're in these skirts and they're still supposed to play hardcore baseball is bogus.
And they did it.
And they did it.
That's the thing, is that, and that's really a testament to these women, because some people could look at that and say, okay, if you want me to play in a skirt, then I'm going to have to tamp down my game. And these women were not going to tamp down their game.
Well, they realized
and that one little moment of just an ice pack on this woman's horrific bruise on her thigh just said all of that in a word. But it was shocking, and that was part of the entertainment value, and it just worked.
And I guess, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say about Penny Marshall's directing. It's show me, not tell me, and I love that.
Yeah.
Show me this. You don't have to tell me. You don't have to give me a lecture. You don't have to have somebody state a bunch of facts and whatever. Show me in a picture, and she does it so beautifully. Yeah. And that was one of them. But I think that, it was all those little moments created this big overlaying thing, which I think is what makes it a classic. I think that truly good filmmaking is what can make it a classic. And I think this really was. From the writing to the music to the acting to everything.
And just in case anyone is listening who has not seen this movie and you're not taking a trip down memory lane, this is actually you're learning something. I will not spoil the very, 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 very end. But I will simply say that the team that you expect to win the final game of the AAGPBL World Series does not win. So that is it's unexpected. It was, and I actually think that was a lovely touch. It was, again, it was refreshing. This movie avoided cliche at every turn.
It really did.
There are some tropes. I mean, there's the whole tryout sequence, which, we've talked before about how the audience, the audition rather sequence in a lot of performing arts movies is just something that's always there.
And you have the montage of game after game after game after game, which you want sometimes, because you have to say time has passed and they've done a lot of games. And
the way that they show that the audience increased in these stadiums for that was a great way, because at the beginning of this year, the audience was struggling.
3 people.
And then they started to get, and the moment they did it, so again, another one of those feminist things, right? The turnaround for this league is when Gina Davis decides, not only am I going to catch this ball, I'm going to do the splits and catch this ball right in front of the photographer from Life magazine.
Behind her back.
Yes.
By the way, that one, they had rehearsed that with her stand-in. The stand-in couldn't get it, and Gina did it.
Yes. Although, do you know what Gina said about that?
No.
She said, the editing room made it look like I not only did that, but I bounced right up afterwards. She goes, there was no bouncing right back up from those splits.
I can't imagine.
But no, she did the splits, and she caught the ball. Madonna actually caught the ball in her cap in that one little moment, where she, instead of just catching the ball with her mitt, she took off her cap and caught the ball.
Correct.
And it just kind of is this moment to say these women not only had to play really good baseball, they had to do some flashy little tricks that sometimes boys weren't expected to do.
It's like
so that they
Fred
could get
Astaire
that
and Ginger Rogers. She had to do it all backwards in the high heels.
Yep, thank you.
And that's, they just had to do that little extra to get to the same level, or at least close to. And I think that's what this movie said.
Yeah.
And so I think that you have good storytelling, you have good writing, you have good acting, and I think across the board that even if you don't think some of the people were greatest actors in the world, they were well cast.
Yeah.
And so it worked, and it didn't pull you out of the story. It didn't pull me out of the story. Yeah. I totally think it lives up to what a classic should be.
Yeah.
And also, I think it does not come off as dated.
No. And just, David Strathairn as the kind of,
He's always
executive.
He's always brilliant.
Not a very showy role, but boy, he's always good in everything he does.
He's quiet and
who plays Gina's husband in this? The name
Bill
is
Pullman.
Bill Pullman, who is another
President
one
of the United
who's
States in ID4.
There you go.
Yep.
Always just so dependable. You know, not showy, doesn't do anything, and doesn't take the movie away from the focus where it needs to be, but just really good supporting turns. And the woman who played Helen, who was the character who did the reading for Shirley, got up there, and I don't know her name, but she ended up being on Mad About You for the longest time.
Okay.
And she's just another really just great, solid, dependable performer.
Really good cast. And I think, as I said, good cast, good writing, really good directing.
And what I learned when I was doing a little bit of research, they all had to go to baseball camp for a long time and work really hard. And you know, there was a question as to whether or not they were going to make Madonna work as hard as everybody else. And they did. They did have to move her to the outfield because she could never master the ground balls that a third baseman has to do. But she was at baseball camp every single day with everybody else. And, you know, I think it comes through in some of the performances that these women were bonded together in a way that perhaps most ensemble casts might not be. But they've been through a lot, even before shooting started, to get ready for this thing.
And good directors know that, and that's important
And they really believed in what they were doing.
There was very much a chemistry.
Yeah.
And it was fun. And as I said, I think it is, you learn a little bit because there is some history thrown in, but it's overall, it is an entertaining.
And, you know, and we didn't even talk about the whole sandwich part of this movie, is in that the movie begins and ends with older versions of all of these women.
That's true. So the whole 1942 section is a flashback.
Yep. Yep.
So, you know, there's that. But again,
there is a little weirdness with this woman who looks an awful lot like Gina Davis, but is not Gina Davis in old age makeup, but is dubbed over with Gina Davis's voice.
All of the older actresses were dubbed by the younger actresses' voices, which is weird because when you're looking at it, you're going, that's not her voice. Your voice ages. And if your face looks older, your voice should.
Yeah.
And so that was a weird choice. That might be my only editing choice that I would say, meh.
But you knew it was Gina Davis. I mean, you know, as soon as she spoke, it was like, oh, that's who Gina's going to play. But yeah, I mean, that whole sequence. And then, of course, as soon as the credits start to roll, what's the music that kicks in is
of course,
Madonna.
It's Madonna.
This Used to Be My Playground, which is such a perfect song. It's a very good song for this movie. Yes. It is kind of one of those things like, did they make you do that so that you would be in the, you know, did they dangle a roll in front of you and say, if you record a song for the closing credits, or was she happy to do it? I don't know. I mean, it was a question.
My guess is that she said, I'll do it if you let me do the soundtrack. I mean, that's when soundtracks were big, as you know, the 80s and the 90s movie soundtracks were huge. And so I think that she could very possibly have put that into her agent.
Maybe she wanted to do it. It's a lovely song. It works, and you know the song, of course, at this point. But when you've just seen A League of Their Own,
it's a lovely you know, it's great. You sit there and you stay in the credits just listening to the song because it's a lovely song. Because they're also showing real life AAGPBL members playing.
Yes.
Because they were still alive at the time because it was 1992.
And the lyric that really caught me was, "Don't hold on to the past. Well, that's too much to ask." Like I'm gonna wallow in this nostalgia because it was such a beautiful time in our lives, and it's utterly charming, funny, touching.
Final Diagnosis right there. You just nailed it.
Amazing. Just such a great movie. If you haven't seen it in a while, just put it on your queue.
And it is safe for everybody.
Yes.
It is safe for everybody. And I certainly, if you have girls, young girls, it's totally uplifting.
Although here's where my male feminist said, boys need to watch this movie too.
I agree. You're right.
Boys need to watch this movie.
Yep. You're right. You're exactly right. So, but I as I said, there's some poignant moments in there that are very much Penny Marshall, and I put a lot of it on her, saying, you made this classic. Yeah. This is awesome. As you know, we've talked about this action hero, movie that just came out, Wonder Woman. Dear God, couldn't remember the name. And all of the hype about, first female director, yada, 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 they hit these marks and all of that. That's great. But then you look at some of these other movies where these female directors, when they were one in 1,000, and now, again, I know the numbers aren't that much better now, but again, this was 92.
Yeah.
And Penny Marshall had the helm of this big
So,
movie.
you know,
and I think she was brilliant.
So my true final diagnosis is women have always been able to make really good movies. Women have always been able to play baseball. I mean, they're just, you know, and the fact that it's 2017 and some of these things are still astounding to us probably says way more about us than it does about women.
And the fact that we're still having to fight for stuff is absurd. But it's, as I said, this is a good movie. Happy 25th anniversary is what I'm going to say to A League of Their Own.
Yep.
It's well worth revisiting again.
Great.
That's Popperation.
I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey. Subscribe. We're iTunes, Stitcher,
Google Play.
Google Play, and iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio.
See you next time.
You've been listening to Popperation with Eric and Stacey. Check out our website at popperationroom.com for links to our blog and other extras. Don't forget to subscribe to Popperation via iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and other podcast locations. You can also follow at Popperation Room on Facebook and Twitter. Music provided by purpleplanet.com.